Will, lots of stuff that I want to dive into with you, but I'll start here. Little League Baseball season has officially begun anew, and Major League Baseball season is, at least in my state, we're playing in my part of the state. We've also got Major League Baseball starting, and I know you have been running around with your kids playing sports as well. How wild is it that some people are listening to us and their kids basically didn't play sports and still are not in school? I feel like we've been living in so many different Americas of late, just based on what state you happen to live in. And you travel back and forth from New York and Texas. That has to be like, a seismic difference between what's permissible there and what's permissible in Texas.
Yeah, I feel like I've had the vantage point of living both of those lives. So for a year in New York, sports was stop, start, stop, start. We did get to play a little bit in the fall. Both of my sons are into soccer, and we did have a season that didn't get completed. But now, as we speak today, I don't know if they are active up in the Northeast. I think in pockets and in parts they are. Last night, I was at a soccer tournament with my boys here in Dallas, Texas, and it's full bore, man. These are teams from Brazil, England, all over the United States of America. And the only crazy thing I can see is there's a sign out here that says masks are required on the premises, which is like a dozen soccer fields in open air with the stiff breeze. So I don't really understand that requirement by FC Dallas, but otherwise it's awesome to see kids playing sports.
All right, so with Major League Baseball coming back, would you go sit comfortably in a stadium and watch the Texas Rangers or the Houston Astros play if you were in those cities and you were with your family and you had a ticket, let's say?
No, I'd just wait for football season. I mean, besides making a baseball joke, yeah, I'd go sit in a stadium. Definitely I'd take my family, and we would sit together and watch a game. Baseball, by the way, for what it's worth, I don't know where you are, Clay, but baseball has fallen down to about at least third or fourth in my favorites pecking order. And it's all predicated on where my favorite baseball team is and if they're any good. It has no national appeal to me. I do not care if my team's not involved. So I would probably go to a football game, a basketball game, a soccer game, and probably a hockey game as well before baseball.
Yeah, it's interesting the way that it all shakes out. And the NFL came out and said, speaking of waiting for football, that they expect full stadiums to be full again, full stadiums, full crowds. I think that's good. I think the NFL has handled the pandemic probably better than any other league because they set to their schedule. They played every game. But I give the NFL credit for finding a way, even back in March and April, to get the draft done. And now they've been fairly forward-thinking, even in the face of much opposition, with the idea of being able to get the full stadiums, right, and be able to complete their schedule. I know it's in vogue to rip the NFL on a regular basis, but I think Roger Goodell and the owners and the league officials and the players and everybody else actually handled this better than anybody else in sports.
Ooh, I'm going to borrow two of your phrases. So first of all, you've made the phrase "get woke, go broke" almost a nationally known cliche or phrase that people know what you're talking about. Social justice and business are almost the antithesis of each other. So people think of the NFL as regressive, but you just said they're forward-looking, and you're absolutely right, because when it comes to business, the NFL, among all those big leagues, is the one that understands how to keep the cash register ringing, and you keep the cash register ringing by making sure your fans are happy and interested in your entertainment product. You're damn right the NFL is forward-looking and keeping that happening.
Speaking of forward-thinking and in the opposite, there was a study that came out. I don't know if you saw it. Yahoo News and YouGov did a big poll of sports fans, and 35% of sports fans said they were watching less sports because of all of the political angles that had been brought to bear so far in recent history. Do you hear a lot from those people, and how does that sort of correct itself? Because ultimately, business, theoretically, is in the business of serving as many possible consumers as possible. There have to be a lot of owners out there that are afraid to say it, a lot of league executives that are afraid to say it, but privately they have to be acknowledging that their business is taking major body blows because of politics, not because of the product on the field or the court.
I was listening to sports radio today, and I heard the hosts speaking in these really benign terms of, well, it's just really all about awareness. They were talking about the poll that you just referenced. They were saying, well, it's just really all about awareness. And they had mastered the way of saying absolutely nothing when it comes to this social justice political point of view. But my thought process was, while listening, think about how that radical political point of view has been distilled and sold to everyone in the most benign terms possible. And you know, it's to the extent that your local sports radio host or perhaps your NBA owner or your athlete thinks they're selling you an obvious statement, something akin to, well, I'm opposed to racism. And they sell that to everybody and think that that is going to work when everyone can read through the lines. No, you're selling me politics. In fact, you're selling me radical politics. I know you've been doing this in pop culture for quite some time. You've been doing it through Hollywood. You've been doing it through corporate business and corporate HR departments. But at this point, I think the American public has seen through that, mostly through that nonsense. You want to know what I'm talking about? That form of language that is designed to mask over what is otherwise this really political and radical point of view. And yes, I hear it. Yes, when I talk to people. Now, I will say people know who I am, and they generally know my point of view, and they're probably making some guesses and feeling comfortable sharing those points of view with me. But I do hear people go, yeah, man, I just tuned it out. I can't take it at some point. I definitely hear that.
We're talking to Will Cain. Follow him on Twitter at Will Cain, Fox and Friends Weekend, formerly ESPN radio host. How do you get back to normalcy? Like, let's pretend that the NBA was not convinced that they were on the right side of history, even though they're taking billions of dollars from China, modern Nazis, effectively, if you had to, in fact, analogize a country that is most like Nazi Germany in modern day in terms of its expansionist outlook, the fact that they want their worldview to predominate, the lack of basic human rights. You would probably have to say that the best possible analogy in the world today for Nazi Germany is China. Now, I understand some people are going to be like, well, there's a difference between fascism and communism, everything else. I tend to think that the world's a big circle and that fascists and communists end up with a lot of the same political beliefs and both forms of totalitarianism on opposite ends of the political spectrum. But what would you tell Mark Cuban? Like, pretend that Mark Cuban came to you, Will, and he was like, hey, Will, privately, I want to go out and have a couple of beers. He won't acknowledge it publicly. He has to see the numbers and know that the NBA is absolutely getting crushed. What would you tell him that he needed to do for his business, the Dallas Mavericks, to get back to appealing to people all over your home state of Texas, and also maybe the NBA get back from the worst finals ratings on record, from continued collapsing in viewership that is going on this year? The NBA brand, at least in America, has never been weaker, I don't think, in basically since Magic and Larry were playing before then.
So I'm going to answer that question two ways. First, I'm going to answer that as though I'm talking to your generic NBA owner, and then I'm going to answer it as though I'm talking to Mark Cuban. So first, to the generic NBA owner, I would say you have to step up and have some strength. You have shown yourself to be weak and spineless, and your business is suffering because of it. What I mean is, and this is not limited to NBA owners, and I think you and I have had this conversation in the past, but they're bending to the will of a minority viewpoint, a radical, extreme minority viewpoint, meaning not very many people hold it. But because a few of their employees may hold it, or a very boisterous, loud, small group of their fans, let me amend that, because they're not actually fans, some very loud, boisterous minority commentators online scare you, you're folding. You're selling out the majority of your audience. You're selling out your bottom line in hopes of not getting canceled by this really small, loud minority viewpoint. So grow a backbone, step up, see if you can find some strength, the kind of strength that probably made you a billionaire in the first place, and get back to acting like a man. That's what I would tell any corporate CEO, no matter which business you're in. And guess what? If you come out the other side of it, your bottom line is going to be just fine. They can't cancel you. It doesn't matter if they pull a few ads or they tweet a few times. They can't. Your business is bigger than their voice. When I'm talking to Mark Cuban, the answer is going to be different, because to what you just said a moment ago, Mark Cuban believes, I do think he's a true believer. I think he's a true believer. He believes he's on the side of the Angels, and probably that I'm on the side of the devil. He believes he is fighting for inherent good and I represent bad. He's boiled the world down into that really simplistic prism. And so if he believes that, he might even be willing to sacrifice his bottom line if he thinks he truly is on the side of angels.
Yeah, and I think that's what social media often does, is it convinces you of an artificial duality that Disneyfies, for lack of a better way to describe it, the world, right? Like I always used to say when I was a kid, when I had my kids and they were young, we sit around and watch a Disney movie, kids have the idea, for instance, that animals are good or bad, right? Because in Disney movies, animals talk, and, you know, snakes are often bad. And let's say a deer is often good, right? And so there's this idea that there's an innate goodness in an animal as opposed to it just being an animal. And as you get older, you recognize that black and white, meaning truth and fiction, truth and lie, that there's a lot more nuance sometimes in complex issues. And I think what social media does is it Disneyfies things into thinking this is the right side, this is the wrong side, and all nuance is lost because the loudest and most strident voices carry the farthest.
Yeah, it's an easy and happy worldview to think, I'm not just right, I'm good.
Yeah.
And you're not just wrong, you're bad. It not only makes you feel better about your point of view, it makes you feel better about who you are. Meaning I'm the good guy in this movie that's rolling always around me, my own little personal movie, and you are the antagonist. That's pretty addictive for people of every political stripe.
Right. And that's what social media does. It magnifies it in a much broader context. All right. A couple of other things that I want to hit with you. Deshaun Watson. We started off the show talking about this situation and the fact that Rusty Harden, the attorney down in Texas who's defending Deshaun Watson, came out with 18 different masseuses who he said, hey, Deshaun Watson was a complete gentleman with us. We never had any issues with him. There now are over 20 women who have said the opposite, that he is guilty of sexual assault during those massages. We continue to follow this story. What's your reaction to the way that this story continues to play out, and what do you think of Rusty Harden's strategy to say, hey, here are 18 women that are telling the opposite story from the 21 that have gone public so far?
Well, Rusty Harden's no dummy. He knows that doesn't matter in a court of law. He's probably trying to win the court of public opinion to keep Deshaun from getting canceled from his NFL job right now. But he knows damn well that's not how the legal system works. You know, Johnny Cochran didn't run out 4 or 5 other women to testify that O.J. was perfectly nice to them, and they walked away unscathed. You know, in Heat, Al Pacino wasn't going to run out there with his lawyer with like 5 different bank branch managers to go, he didn't rob my bank.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how many times you were okay and law-abiding. The point is whether or not you broke the law in these other instances. You know, do those 21 masseuses have something to do with Deshaun's character that Rusty Harden could use that? I don't even think that would matter. It only matters what the 18 said and whether or not it's true or not. But I truly think Rusty knows all that. He's not trying to use that to win a court case. He's trying to change the narrative on ESPN and FS1.
Do you think that the Deshaun Watson case, and I know you're covering a lot of different stories on a day-to-day basis, but I continue to be amazed by the degree of arm's length treatment of this story in the world of sports, because there have been a lot of stories, and I'm going to kind of run through for my audience out there, and I'm sure you have either covered or talked about them at some point in time. Quarterbacks are the most important athletes in all of sports today, right? Star quarterbacks are even more at the pinnacle of that. And so if you think about star quarterbacks and their issues with the justice system at any point in time over the last, let's say, 20, 25 years, you had Michael Vick in dogfighting. You had allegations of sexual assault against Ben Roethlisberger. You had Brett Favre supposedly sending a nude photo to Jen Sturger, who worked at the time at the New York Jets, if I remember correctly, the details behind that. You have had the Deflategate, which wasn't even in any way remotely criminal surrounding Tom Brady, but went into a massive court system and analysis all surrounding that. And certainly in college, and then even leading into the NFL, because he had another issue of sexual assault allegation against him. You had Jameis Winston at FSU alleged to have raped another FSU student and then to have groped an Uber driver. I believe it was out in Scottsdale. I am sure there are other examples of quarterbacks at the pinnacle of the sport of football who have behaved badly and found themselves in the judicial system. But it seems to me that all of those stories were covered extremely aggressively. There were tons of reporters on them. It was a story that you couldn't have escaped when all of them happened. And it feels like to me everybody has called off the proverbial dogs on this story about Deshaun Watson, and there's almost silence even as all of these cases continue to add up in many different parts of the sports media, kind of accepting the Outkick universe, where we've covered it pretty aggressively.
So a couple of things. You're absolutely right. I saw Darius Leonard, the Indianapolis Colts linebacker, going back at, for example, Marcus Spears at ESPN saying they're covering Deshaun Watson more than they're covering, and I don't even remember this guy's name, but the white guy who beat up and did he even kill his wife? It was basically a no-name player, and that was like a month ago. It's awful. It's horrible details, horrible story. But he was like, it's race, because he was white, Deshaun is black. And Marcus and I don't know who else responded, were absolutely right. No, this is about stardom, not about race. Deshaun is not just a quarterback. He is an absolute star. But that was somebody saying we're covering Deshaun too much. I agree with you. I think Deshaun is beyond a sports story. I think it's a news story. I think it should be on your cable and broadcast news networks at this point. Now, I will say, Clay, the thing is, yes, it's a massive, massive story. By the way, another one to add to your list, Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield, Cam Newton, all of the massive stories. Yes, I do not think this one has been covered as much as we freak out about all those other ones, and I wonder why. By the way, race is not a through line. You just named a ton of guys like Jameis who got a ton of coverage, and Johnny Manziel, of a different race, got a ton of coverage. So what is it that makes Deshaun different? Is it that he's carried this good guy personality throughout his career, and that's why we tread lightly? Dabo said he was Superman in cleats. Deshaun has been not just a star quarterback, he's been a likable personality. And I don't know if that's why it's being treated with arm's length. I think the diagnosis is absolutely right.
I mean, it is wild. It's a good point, because if you compare, let's say, Peyton, you remember this, when ESPN and a lot of other sports media members went way overboard with the Peyton Manning 20-year-old mooning allegations. Remember that in the training room, and it turned in the wake of Peyton Manning winning the Super Bowl, and Cam Newton didn't shake his hand and then stormed out of the press conference, and it turned into a big story about the way that Cam Newton had responded, and then people online were like, well, 20 years ago, Peyton Manning was alleged to have behaved inappropriately in a locker room, training room, and ESPN covered it like it was Watergate, right? If you just compare the way that the Peyton Manning allegations in a training room of mooning or whatever he did, and you compare that with everything else that's going on in the world of Deshaun Watson, it's wild to me to compare the two things there. Like, there's no similarity of treatment at all. Even back in the day when Ben Roethlisberger was accused, I think it was by one or two women, different women, of sexual assault in civil lawsuits, and they did an investigation and everything else. Like, that was the lead story everywhere. Brett Favre sending a pic to someone was the lead story everywhere. Deshaun Watson, with over 20 women having filed lawsuits accusing him of sexual assault, incredibly detailed storyline. Sports Illustrated found another woman who hasn't filed a lawsuit and told her story. I mean, and yet we don't really hear anything in the media at large.
Not to the magnitude, you're right, of what we've become accustomed to star quarterbacks and their troubles getting coverage. I know you talked about this as well. Look, it's not a football game, and that's back to the Rusty Harden point. It's not 21 good moments, 18 bad moments. It's not that he's been good more than he's been bad. But the real takeaway
OJ didn't, as you said, OJ didn't kill most people.
That's right. But it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. But the other takeaway is what you pointed out, I believe, is we're up to close to 40 masseuses, which is pretty fascinating in and of itself. A, that he loves massages this much, and B, he just can't seem to find one who's up to his standards that he's dedicated to.
Like, how many? That's a good question. I asked this question on Twitter yesterday. How many athletes do you think have had 40 different women give them massages? And I don't mean theoretically therapeutic massages, right? Like, we're talking about him. It's not like it'd be one thing if he had done what Robert Kraft was alleged to have done, right? Like, you're going to go into one of those massage parlors and you kind of know what you're paying for if you're going there. But he, in theory, is getting reputable masseuses that he is paying, in theory, to try to get. I mean, I think his cover story is, hey, I'm a pro athlete. I need to be able to be at my peak physical condition. And my analogy is, you know, a lot of athletes, once you find a personal trainer that you love, many of them will stay with that personal trainer for 10, 15, 20 years in order to make sure that they maximize their overall athletic ability. The same thing is true of masseuses when it's a therapeutic massage to allow you to be better on the field. And yet, this 40 different women at a minimum, this is at least 40. We don't know what the total number is. I bet there's not a single person listening to me right now who has had 40 different women give them legitimate massages in their lives.
How many massages have you had?
0. I've never paid for it. Now, my wife, whenever we go on vacation, sometimes I'll go play awful golf, and she'll go to the spa and get a massage. She might have had 40 different women give her massages over the years. Maybe, I don't know. I know I've paid for a lot of them over the years at hotels. But in my entire life, I have never gotten a therapeutic massage. Maybe I should have, but 0. I'm 41 years old. I have never had one. Have you ever had a therapeutic massage?
I got you beat by 1. I got 1 on my honeymoon, but I'm not a massage guy, and I'm not a golf guy. So if we were on vacation together, I don't know what I would do. I'd be bellied up to the bar, so I don't love either of those activities too much. Real quick, I know if there's some professional high-level athlete listening who goes, well, you're not one of us. We have to have massages all the time to take care of our bodies. And I'd say, yeah, I get that. But that would be like from the training staff or highly paid professionals, not randos on Instagram. I don't know if he's finding them on Instagram or communicating with them through Instagram, but he doesn't seem to be too discerning about who his 40 different masseuses are.
That's the truth. And that's why I think ultimately if you're trying to increase your overall athletic performance, this ain't it. This isn't the equivalent of a therapeutic massage or anything of that nature.